right, guys, welcome on in to Drinks with Binks. I'm Julie Stewart-Binks. We are still staying home to stay safe. This is the place I broadcast the show, also eat my breakfast, and send all of those lovely emails to everyone because we literally do not leave this place because we are still dealing with a global pandemic right now. And actually, surprisingly, we're going to see baseball return this week. At least that is what we are looking forward to at the moment. We'll deal with NBA and NHL and maybe NFL at a later point, but baseball's back, baby, and we are so excited. It's a shortened MLB season. It's going to be very different, but it is also almost like we're just entering into the playoffs. This is a marathon, and we're sprinting it. And for that, I'm very excited to welcome in today's guest, my good friend and former MLB pitcher, current MLB analyst, CJ Nitkowski. CJ, I know you're super busy. You're already calling games. You're all over the map, but happy to have you here on the show today. How are you doing these days?
It's good to be with you. It's good to see you and talk with you and catch up a little bit. And man, the idea of baseball getting started, it took longer than I thought it ever would. But we're going to get real live games. We've already seen some of the exhibitions, and it's going to be fantastic. I think we all need it really badly.
Yeah, and for you, CJ, you are coming from a hotel room ahead of broadcasting a game, which means you are not in your house. How does it feel to sort of, I don't know, take a step out of the quarantine life and return to a little bit of normalcy?
It was a big step. So I live in Atlanta, Georgia in the off seasons, but work here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area covering games for the Rangers in Arlington. So I had to get on my first airplane the other day for the first time in a really long time. And it wasn't too bad, quite honestly, just the idea of getting back out of the house and doing some things that, of course, were a part of everyday life, especially for me, as you well know, all the heavy travel that comes along with working in this industry. And that was always like a big normal. Well, this was a lot different, but it really wasn't too bad. I think I have noticed it's interesting when we go through these things as a country where there's something really big that we're all involved in, that you have a large amount of people, I think, that are very empathetic. They're a little bit more polite. Everyone's kind of like, yeah, we're going through this together. And then you have also the really stressed out group, too, that maybe is not, they're a little bit more on edge. So I saw a little bit of both in the airport. I saw a couple of people getting into a spat about, I think, getting too close to each other and a guy yelling and screaming on his phone. But then I noticed it also, for the most part, seemed a lot more quiet. People were more polite. Again, you know this from heavy travel. Like the idea of respecting personal space, we were having an issue with that, I think, in general in our country. I think there was an opportunity maybe for some room for improvement. Well, now we're giving each other tons of space. Like the idea of getting on an airplane and boarding an airplane, how crazy crowded it would get as everyone was trying to get on that plane. That was gone. Now the flight is only probably at about 50 or 60% capacity, but that part of it was actually pretty nice.
I'm surprised to hear that because people suck, first of all, but then people just suck on planes. They're just the worst. Everyone forgets how to be a person, and it's just anarchy. So are you saying then that people are better, or are we still seeing jerks? Like, are we seeing, we're seeing lots of jerks and idiots on planes.
I don't know if we'll ever eliminate completely that population, but it was nice. Fair. The idea. So also when we landed, everybody didn't stand up. Now, I'm not completely against that idea because I know, listen, as a taller guy, I'm 6'3" and got terrible posture. I'm achy. So if I did a cross-country flight, I want to stand up just because I'd like to get out of my seat after sitting there for 5 hours. But the idea of everyone cramming in the aisle a lot of times after you've landed always seems unnecessary. There was none of that. You'll appreciate this. We always say how polite Canadians are, right? I think the guy that was across the aisle from me, we had a lot of no, you go, no, you go, no, you go. Yes. It was like, all right, let's see who can be even the most polite. And he ended up being most firm, so I got up before he did. But that kind of stuff I did see. It was one flight. Maybe that'll change. I don't have to travel too much. I actually have to do about, I think it's 3 trips. So I'll have 6 flights for the season. That's it. And so maybe it'll be a small sample size. But to start things off, I was pleasantly surprised overall, and I'll keep my fingers crossed and hope for the future.
Okay, well, that is really great to hear. That's also known as the Canadian stop sign, when you are stopped at a four-way and you're like, no, you go, no, you go, no, you go, and you're just there all day. But CJ, sometimes people like to indulge in a beverage on a plane to calm their nerves. We like to indulge in beverages here on Drinks with Binks. And you are broadcasting a game today, so I wasn't going to force alcohol down your
Thank
throat,
you.
which I probably would have anyway. But what do we got here today? What are we drinking?
So it's an iced coffee morning for me. And so, where I stay in the hotel here, sorry about the shine off my plastic cup. That is life in a hotel, as you well know. But a little bit of iced coffee for me without the ice. But I am iced coffee all year round, no matter, it could be 0 degrees or 110 degrees. It's iced coffee for me all the time. And so a little bit of heavy caffeine to get me through the first part of my day, a little heavier caffeine to then get me through the second part of my day.
And then heaviest caffeine at the end of the night. I have my, actually in a Toronto mug, hadn't really, nice little lipstick stain there too. Glad that we are bringing our best effort to the show.
An assistant about that one.
Yes, yeah, my production assistant is slacking. And then I also have a nice little, I have no air conditioning on, so this drink is it's sweating, but this is a glass of water.
Ooh.
And for those of you who can see up close, what it says on it is Drinks with Binks. You can't really see it that well, but this is courtesy of Abby Malangone, my production assistant's sister, sent me this nice little drink. So
very nice.
We got
you showing off with your ice in your glass that you get to drink out of. Plastic cup, no ice for me.
Yeah, this is how we do it in quarantine right now. Not a lot of booze, but we're healthier for it. And CJ, so we're drinking some iced coffee, we're drinking some water. You are getting ready for a game right now. So we're under the understanding, we're very excited sports are coming back. We also understand it's a very different world. It's, in the midst of a global pandemic. Take me through, you're getting ready to actually calling the game, calling it, and maybe what are the biggest differences?
Yeah, so I think, from as far as what's going on this year, the differences, the biggest one is going to be obviously no crowd noise. And so how we call the game, that'll be part of it. But from a prep standpoint, like I just got a text message a little while ago from the Rangers listing off who we're going to get to talk to via Zoom today. Right. The idea, there's no mingling in the clubhouse. There's no finding players, talking to them on the side, maybe spending a little bit of time with the manager. My situation as a broadcaster is a little bit different than the writers, right? The writers are always looking for stories and they're going to dig in, and it could be positive or negative for me as a home broadcaster. I'm always looking for the positive spin, or I'm always looking for some insight to bring fans into exactly what a player might be working on. What is he thinking about? Coaches are really good for that as well. And so those conversations have gotten limited. They're pretty much near impossible to have on a one-on-one basis unless you have a personal relationship with a coach or a player. Of course, you can text them and call them. So the Zoom calls are big. I will mostly just listen in on those and let the writers ask their questions, just because they got a job to do. They have to get a couple of columns out per day. And so I try to step back. I'll jump in every once in a while and ask a question if I have something that's kind of on my mind. But the way the clubhouse works, kind of the politics of being a writer, is pregame. Let's just say Evan Grant, who writes for the Dallas Morning News, is talking to Joey Gallo in front of his locker. No other writers are allowed to come over. It's kind of the etiquette among them, because it's a kind of exclusive time. That's gone. So these guys have a real challenge right now as far as trying to come up with something unique. But for me, it works to my advantage, because they're asking all of their questions now in front of all of us. So if there's something maybe that I hadn't thought of or something that I had missed, they're going to ask the players. That part of it has been both good and bad, but I'd say on my side it's been really helpful. I just sit there, open up a Word document, and I'm taking notes on every single player or whatever, if the manager's talking about that player or if it's that player specifically. And so that part has been kind of good. And I wonder for the players who talk about the future of the game and through all of this, what's going to stick going forward and what might not stick. This won't stick long term, but I don't doubt that the players love it, because there's no media in the clubhouse, right? The idea, and I think baseball probably has some of the most access. I don't know how it is. You would know better than I would in hockey.
Yeah,
but the idea that there's a 45-minute window now that's pre-batting practice. So they really have done a good job of trimming down the time. But I think the players would be all about this if they could going forward, to keep the media out. I don't think that'll happen.
And I think that's going to be the case in a bunch of other sports too, because then, whether you're a manager or an owner or a commissioner, really the lack of media helps you, because there's a limited opportunity for someone to say something stupid.
Yes.
But also, to your point, then you don't have to ask any tough questions, especially as a team employee. You can just listen to the answers.
Yep.
And I know that this is just one of the many things that you have to go through. We have to take a quick time out, but we want to hear a whole lot more about what it is like to broadcast during COVID and what we can expect from a shortened MLB season. We've got CJ Nitkowski. Stay with us here on Drinks with Binks.
Hi, I'm Kevin Burkhardt, and I had Drinks with Binks.
Hey, Hey guys, welcome on back to Drinks with Binks. I'm JSB. We've got former MLB pitcher, current MLB analyst for Fox MLB Network and the Texas Rangers, CJ Nitkowski. We were hearing what it's like now to get information. The interviews are all through Zoom. It's a very virtual world as MLB looks to is returning this week. And so let's pick it up from there. You get your information, you get your interviews from these Zoom calls. There's no clubhouse access. There's no meeting with guys after batting practice. What happens next for you to then be able to get to the point where you're calling a game?
So it's been interesting that, all of the websites and things that we have access to, and there's a lot of pay stat services that really do a great job. We use Inside Edge. We use Sport Radar this year. They've been fantastic. And, I've been doing team games now. This is my fourth year. I was doing national stuff for a while when we were both at FS1 and doing studio and games. And it took me a little while to really streamline my prep to get it, where you want to. There's so much information out there. And you have to be careful, and I think it's always a work in progress as far as the data and the information we have and what really works on a broadcast, right? I have to be very careful. Like, I find something interesting, but, maybe 10% of the audience might find that little kind of nugget that's a little stat heavy, a little bit nerdy, find it interesting. And so trying to find the balance and figuring out exactly what is best for a game, I think is always kind of evolving. So I do have to be careful not to over prep and not to throw too many numbers at people and talk over their heads. And always remember kind of who's watching the game and why are they watching the game. So there's a new younger audience that is hungry for that stuff. But then, of course, you have your core audience who's been watching baseball for 30, 40 years that doesn't want to do math when they're watching a game. They want to have a drink with Binks and just relax and watch the game. It's kind of, so you can't forget that audience. So there is a balance in there somewhere. But I have we have great access to a couple of those different sites. And I've gotten to the point now where I do less writing and more that I have the websites up with the players that I want. You can kind of custom make your reports and you start to find those things that people like. So we may talk about, a pitcher's pitch repertoire as an example. What percentage does Kyle Gibson use his slider? What was the batting average on that pitch? Whatever it may be. Is it his best strikeout pitch? Things that I think could make sense that if you explain them properly and explain them quickly, fans can kind of wrap their brains around it. Because I do think it's part of our responsibility to bring them along to where we are, this kind of new age in statistics. Again, without making it boring, try to, and not talk over their heads, really, really important. And so there's things like that these websites that we have access to that are great for that kind of information. The stories, I think, are important. As many personal quotes as you can have, we'll bring into our broadcast very often. Make sure I have that stuff ready to go. What did Chris Woodward, the manager here with the Rangers, say about this player, or what he's working on, or what he wants to see from him, or why is he batting second, not eighth anymore? All of those things I think are really important to have in hand. But nowadays it can happen so quickly. I mean, again, I was an over-preparer. I can go to the ballpark now, maybe even 2 hours before the game, and go kind of get my setup, make sure I have everything where it needs to be, fill out my lineup card. I do like to kind of keep score. I do it on the iPad now. So we write it instead of using the paper, but write it on the iPad, which is really kind of helpful. And so you can access all your old scorecards very easily doing it that way. So a lot of digital scoring that's going on. And then we usually go over elements about an hour before the game, which means we go over all the graphics, everything that has been built for the day. What kind of video do we have? What are we going to do for an open? Go grab a bite to eat. Make sure you got your makeup on, which, being at a studio now, I got to do my own makeup, my own wardrobe. I miss those days at Fox where we were spoiled. And then tape an open, or usually we do an open live like the very beginning of the show. But because there's no fans, we tape them now. And so we'll tape an open maybe 15 minutes before the game, and then it's first pitch at 7:05.
Okay, so from all of that, I gathered that much of your routine has not changed at all during this.
Not really, no.
Yeah,
outside of the interaction with the players.
Do you get like temperature checks? Do you have to, what's sort of those types of things you have to do?
So I'm what they call a tier 3 level person, which is essentially the media, the players, the coaches, those that are interacting with each other on the field are considered tier 1. You get into your front office folks and those that are stadium operations. A lot of them will end up being tier 2. They have these different tiers because they're based on how often you need to be tested, where do you have access, those kinds of things. So me as a tier 3 member of the media, they take your temperature as you walk in, they check your bag, and off you go. Now, I did have to get a COVID test to get started, but as far as I know, outside of feeling any symptoms, I don't think that we will be doing very much. I don't know. As a tier 3, tier 1, they're every other day. But the interaction is limited, and especially here at this ballpark. So there's actually a couple different things that happen now because of COVID. First of all, we have a new ballpark here, so the written press is actually a level above the broadcast booth. So there's not nearly the interaction with as much members of the media as there once was. And so it's me and my partner, Dave, in the television booth, and the new TV booth at Globe Life Field is ridiculously big. I mean, it is humongous. So we have no problem keeping our space. We're 6 feet from each other when we're calling the game. We're 6 feet from each other while we're shooting our open, like really far apart, which is kind of interesting. The stage manager is in there, but they limit the traffic inside the booth now too. So that's a really big part of it. We do have a piece of plexiglass that we can put in between us if we want to. I kind of joke around that once we're in there in that booth, I tell Dave Raymond, my partner, I said, listen, man, you're in my germ circle now. There's no getting out of it. So once you're in it, I'm not saying that we're going to be sitting right next to each other, but it's pretty difficult when you're spending that much time with one person to really try to keep it a strictly social distancing. It's almost like it's a member of your family at that point. So it's different. You have to wear a mask. I can take it off once I'm in the booth, but you have a mask on the entire time. So I live pretty close by and all that kind of stuff. So there's definitely a lot going on as far as those things in the safety protocols.
Yeah, and then I guess I think that the contingency plan would be like, what if you show up to the stadium one day and your temperature is not able to go in? And then it's like, okay, well, I guess we don't have CJ for the broadcast today, right?
Back to the hotel and call the game from there, I guess, maybe.
Yeah, okay. So there are plans in that regard. And then I always wonder, like, is the Spider-Man meme, if you ended up seeing someone in like tier 1 and they saw you in tier 3 just by chance, and you're like, we're not supposed to see each other, But you did mention that, you have all these stats and information and you want to weave them into the game. I was watching your game on Tuesday night, Texas against Colorado. And you do notice there is a lot more time for you to talk and tell these stories, because there's no like, and make a clap, none of that sort of in stadium stuff. Is there, in a way, a sense of pressure to entertain more?
We'll see. I've thought about this the entire time, and how do we handle this? And I'll try to watch as many games as I possibly can and see who's doing a better job than others. I don't know if I have a definite answer to that. There's something to be said at a baseball game for that silence, and you have to be comfortable with silence. I struggle with it. You can tell, right? You've known me for a while. I talk a lot. But the silence is something that it scares me, because there's no fan noise. We have the piped-in fan noise, and I think they do a pretty good job with it, but obviously people know there's not fans there. And
yeah, because I'm curious if they will have the buildup of the fans being like,
They're doing a pretty good job with it, actually. So far, I watched a couple of our webcasts where they started doing it, and the TV people aren't doing it. It's happening in the stadium. PA and then the ballpark entertainment people that are doing it. And so far, so good. I think our Rangers as a group has done a really good job of bringing up moments, right? All of a sudden, there's 2 strikes. You have a chance to finish off the inning. Maybe there are a couple of runners on base, and they do start to build it up, and it gets louder. Dave and I will joke about how the fans are really getting into the moment.
I love
you can't
that,
help but say it, you know what I mean? Have some fun with it. But so far, I will tell you, I wasn't sure how I felt about it. When I first heard it, I was like, is that going to be, how's that going to play? I'm really grateful that we have it. It completely changes the ambiance, the atmosphere, and how you feel while you're calling the game.
I could see that from your perspective, also from players' perspective, as well as that's something that has been very normal in their series of circumstances growing up since a kid. We got a whole lot more we want to get to with CJ Nitkowski and the return of the MLB season. Don't go anywhere, guys. This is Drinks with Binks. We've got coffee and water. A wild show.
Hi, I'm Boog Shambi, and I had Drinks with Binks.
Welcome back into Drinks with Binks. We've got CJ Nitkowski from the Texas Rangers, former MLB pitcher, current analyst for, of course, the Rangers, MLB Network, and Fox. And CJ, we were discussing the differences in the broadcast, and you just told me in the break that you guys will be calling the road games from your home stadium. How is that going to work?
That's a great question. We're going to find out here pretty soon. Of course, it's a 60-game duel. 30 of those games will be on the road. I'm doing a pretty good bulk of them. I know I'm doing 47 overall of the 60, but I know a good amount of those will be the road games, if not all of them. So that part will be interesting. Think about when you call a game, depending on where you're seated in the stadium. Like our broadcast booth now is a little bit higher up, which is that's just part of the trend that teams understand the value of where the broadcast booths used to be. It's a great place for suites, or it's a great place to have other seats. And so broadcasters have gotten moved around. You see it in Washington, Pittsburgh, all the new ballparks. It happens. It's part of it. But what that does is it does force you a little bit to watch the game more on the monitor, maybe than to watch it in person. Because you can't see as well, and that's okay. That's just kind of the way that it goes, not a big deal. But this will really get put into practice now when you're actually not even at the game. Now, I've seen other sports try to do it at times here and there, especially for international competitions. I can't imagine you probably have been involved, or at least know people that have been involved in doing those kinds of things where you're not at the event but calling it. The question I think becomes for us is exactly what our monitor setup is going to be. You know, it's one thing to watch the program, the main thing that everyone else is seeing. But what I'm worried about and what I'm concerned about, two things. One is the idea that, you know, as I'm watching the game from my perch above home plate, is a lot of times I'll see something that the camera doesn't get. And, you know, you get in your producer's ear and say, hey, I think the left fielder went left first instead of right. Looked like he got a bad break or something happened in the field that nobody saw. Then they can start looking around their cameras to see if they can find that. And then they'll show it to you in what we call our ISO. And hey, is that what you're looking for? Yeah, that's it. Let's show that. That goes away, right? That's not going to be there. Now, they are talking about having all 9 of the cameras are, I guess, split up on one screen, on a separate screen for us to see, so that we can see everything that every cameraman sees and camerawoman in the ballpark. That might help. It's going to be weird, though, because that's also going to be very busy. And the idea of trying to track that while watching and calling the game, I think could be a real challenge. So I'm concerned about that. The other thing I'm concerned about is we're doing what they're calling world feeds. So instead of the Fox Sports Southwest team being on the road, say in Anaheim, to call an Angels game, everybody is back in Dallas, and the group that's doing the game is the same feed that's running the home feed. Right? Home and road feeds are always different. So you're basically going to get the home feed. So because of that, I can't call for replays. So we will be at kind of the mercy of what they're doing. I hate that part, right? Because you like to think that as an analyst, you can find a way to be insightful, to see something that hopefully the fans didn't get, and then you can teach them something or show them something that's, you know, hopefully at least a little bit interesting. You lose all of that power. And so the idea of just basically going off of what the other team is doing is what you're going to be confined to. And I get it. We're making a lot of sacrifices here, and less people traveling. People feel more comfortable doing that, and that's why that's happening. But I know I'm gonna miss that part a lot, not being able to call for replays or certain angles on things, whatever it may be, or even call for a live camera shot. You know, that's one of those things. I don't do it too often, but you can get in a producer's ear, and I may say something like, hey, give me the high home view here because I want to show the way that the defense is set up. I want to show, you know, whatever it is, what's going on in the field. And so they'll allow you, they can't ask for it too often, but they'll allow you once in a while to ask for a certain shot. That goes away as well. So it's going to be, we're going to do our best to make sure it doesn't come across as a lesser broadcast, but I think fans are probably the ones that are really intuitive, may be able to pick up on some of the things that are different during those road.
Yeah, the replay bit is interesting because it's essentially someone else deciding what sort of deserves a replay, and then that might be just like sprung on you, and you're like, okay, I guess I'll talk for another 15 seconds on this thing that might not be that interesting.
Well, exactly. And think about this, right? So if the Rangers hit a home run on the road, and Joey Gallo hits a 500-foot home run, and it's an amazing swing, we're going to show it more. We normally would. In Texas, the Anaheim Angels, Los Angeles Angels fans, they don't want to see that 10 times over, but the Ranger fans do, right? So there's going to be that. So hopefully what's going to happen is that producers in those spots will understand that this is going to both teams, so we can't just go the home team heavy on every replay. Yeah.
No, that makes sense. So many questions I want to get to. Just one last question on the broadcast. Mm-hmm. As you know, I'm a former sideline reporter, current, I don't know what, court jester in my own house drinking. And a number of my friends are sort of concerned about their sideline jobs because of the fact that they can't have access to players. What do you feel, especially for baseball, in terms of that role?
Yeah, so I think the role becomes more important than ever. I'm a huge fan of what our sideline reporters do and what they bring to a broadcast. You think about calling a game for 3 hours and the insight that they can bring to a game, moving around the stadium. Now, we're at a little bit of an advantage right now because we're in a new stadium. So Emily Jones, who is our maid sideline reporter, has been doing it for years here with the Rangers. Last night, or Tuesday night, kind of made her way around the stadium and showed some different things. And we can probably continue to do that, some of the features of the stadium. So we have that advantage. She also has a really good relationship with the clubhouse and the players. That has been going on for a long time, so she can still get that access. But I think it's really important to bring them into the broadcast even more because, again, there's no crowd noise. There's going to be times where the game's going to feel more dead than usual. And, you know, you've done this. You've been in that spot where you get burned once in a while and you're doing a sideline bit on maybe something a coach told you, or maybe it's a stadium feature, whatever going on, and then all of a sudden action breaks out on the field. And you're trying to get off of that as quickly as you possibly can because it's back-to-back doubles on 3 pitches, and all of a sudden the Rangers have the tying run at the plate. and maybe you're talking about something that's not associated with the game specifically at that moment. You get caught in those spots. Sometimes it happens, but I'd rather take that chance of having some of that content available during the game, because especially baseball, things have a tendency to move a little bit slower. So because of that, I think it's on teams, right? Especially if you're doing things like college football, the NFL, where you're not there every day the way we are with baseball, that these PR departments give access to the sideline reporters, whether it's via Zoom, via phone, whatever it may be, and set aside some time. Let them make requests for 3 or 4 people over in the baseball situation, maybe over before a series starts or during a series, so they can start to dig a little bit. And because everybody wins, right? Everybody wins in that situation when it goes well. Your fans win because they're sitting there and they're listening to a story about one of your players. Your sideline reporter wins because they're bringing great content to the broadcast. And then, of course, even the player ends up winning because there's usually a good story about that player or some good insight to what might be going on with him or her on the field. So I hear what you're saying, but I think it should be the exact opposite. I think that these folks should be highlighted more. They should be given more access. And there's a big place for them on the broadcast now more than ever.
Great. I absolutely love to hear that. And especially when you're trying to talk through a game with no crowd noise and no weird little activities going on the big screen. Mm-hmm. It's an opportunity for us to hear more from sideline reporters, of which, as I know, many of their stories never get broadcast just because that was how the game always was. But glad to hear that support. We got a whole lot more to come with CJ Nitkowski here on Drinks with Binks. Don't go anywhere, guys. We got baseball. It's coming back, at least for a little bit. Hey guys, welcome back to Drinks with Binks. We've got CJ Nitkowski here, former MLB pitcher, current MLB analyst, and as you are watching this, he is broadcasting a regular season MLB game, and we got 60 games down from 162 because of a global pandemic, and there's also a lot of other CBA-related BS that went on that we'll get to another time. But I will say that while we are excited that baseball is coming back, we still have to acknowledge that this is during a very, unprecedented, difficult time for everyone in the world. And so just right off the bat, I know you are an employee of a baseball team, and we all want to see this succeed. But what would MLB be looking at most cautiously as we proceed, as an area that needs to go well so that this doesn't shut down?
Yeah, so listen, they're doing an unbelievable job. I don't know if you've seen the numbers. They'll release them, every week or so. I mean, they're testing their players every other day. That also means their coaches, everybody that's involved. Like a really heavy spread of this COVID-19 among players would be a huge problem. We see guys that are testing positive. Fortunately, a lot of them do seem to be asymptomatic. Not all of them, but a lot of them do. So that's somewhat encouraging. But if there's some reason, somehow, some way we ended up with a really big outbreak, that would become a problem. And Major League Baseball certainly knows that. We were already missing some of the bigger names in the sport that have decided not to play. Buster Posey, David Price are a couple of those. I mean, if that trend had gotten bigger, that might have been a problem maybe potentially for Major League Baseball. But it is the idea of making sure that you're keeping everybody healthy. And I think so far, so good. The numbers, the positivity rate is so far below what we're seeing nationally. So I've been encouraged by that. The players are doing a really good job. There's MLB protocols for the players, and then there's also what the teams are asking their players to do on their own. And so that's been really important. Just the idea of no spitting, no tobacco. What about when you get on the road? Is it okay to go out to lunch? A lot of players and teams are saying, no, we'd prefer you to stay home. Let's just knock out these 2 months, give it everything you have. Let's not take any chances. There's personal accountability. There's accountability to your teammates. And then if teams need to take action, I think they would. And then you get to the league, right? If things really got bad and the league had to step in, they would. The COVID-19 injury list is what they're calling it. It has no minimum days spent, right? Our injured list has 10 days minimum. So if you get hurt and you go on the IL, you're out for a minimum of 10 days. They actually dropped that down from 15 for this year specifically because it's a shortened season. But with the COVID IL, you could be on it for 2 or 3 days. You just have to make sure that you have 2 negative tests that were taken 24 hours apart to be able to get back on the field. And so far, like I said, so far so good. I think they've done a really nice job. We know teams are going above and beyond to keep their clubhouses clean, what they're doing in the dugouts. You see a lot of the video and pictures from around the league, expanded dugouts, expanded bullpens. Finally in Boston, those bullpens are some of the worst in the league because you're right. The fans are right on top of you, and there's just no room there. It's so tight. It's crazy to think that that's still a big league bullpen. Well, this year, those relievers will get to sit in the right field stands during the game.
Yeah,
so they can have a little bit more.
By those Red Sox
I know. That's what they should do is pump like places like Philadelphia, New York, and Boston, pump in some of that crowd noise into the bullpen that you usually get as a visitor. It's not very pleasant. But I think they're doing a great job. And, hopefully the numbers continue to be really, really low the way that they are. And hopefully, God forbid, nobody gets significantly sick or worse. That obviously would be tragic for our sport. But I think that things right now are pretty much under control.
Yeah, and I know with some of this you mentioned, the teams are wanting to take this very seriously. The players, no one wants to obviously get this because, as we've seen with MLS, it can wipe out an entire team in terms of being a part of the return to play. But people are also people. And as we've seen, people are getting sick of staying home, of doing the right thing. They're going out to bars, they're going out to restaurants, much to the fact that they shouldn't be doing that. So how much onus do you think the players feel on themselves to really, really take this seriously? And what then is the narrative in these clubhouses to say, hey, guys, we don't want to be known as the team that messes this up?
Yeah, and you know this from being an athlete, that you love your teammates, you respect them, but they're not always on the same page as everybody, right? There's always a loose cannon or two that may be perfectly fine breaking the rules, maybe selfish, right? You don't get to pick your teammates in professional sports, and so that does become a concern. I don't doubt that teams and teammates have probably identified a guy or two that they get a little bit concerned about, whether it's because of past history or just even the things that are being said around the clubhouse, right? You'd hate to have that teammate that's, spreading conspiracy theories in the clubhouse and not taking things seriously and can't wait to take his mask off or make fun of other people for following protocols. Like, those are the guys that you would worry about and keep a close eye on. So not having been in any of these clubhouses, I don't know, but I'd love to think that the 30 players that are going to be making these opening day rosters to start the season are 30 players that all understand that one mistake could really be very costly to not only yourself, but to somebody else, right? I mean, I am in the camp of I'm not too concerned about the young, healthy group and what this virus has done to them, but that's not how it works. It's the idea that one guy makes a mistake while you're, on the road in Seattle. All of a sudden he has it, but they doesn't even know it. Gives it to somebody else who gives it to somebody else's grandmother, and all of a sudden you have a tragedy on your hand. And that's the part that I hope would like to think that really resonates with these guys. It's not just themselves. It's not just their teammates and keeping the game going, but it's everybody else that can be involved in this thing that is so difficult to try to control. And remember this, too. There are coaches that are not coaching this year because of their age. And because they're a little bit more high risk, there are some people with some medical conditions as well that have put them at high risk. Some that are still out there, like the fact that Dusty Baker is still going to manage, good for him. It's great to see him back in uniform. If you're a Houston Astro and you break any protocol, you're a real jerk. I mean, you have to think about your manager and how great it is for the game to be able to see Dusty Baker in a uniform again. How dare you even come remotely close to putting that at risk by being selfish and thinking of yourself? And I just use Dusty and the Astros as an example, but there are plenty of those around the league. So hopefully that's something that, at least if for any player that might be close to it's just not that big of a deal, that'll start thinking about those things as well and how important it really is to do the right thing.
Yeah, well, history of breaking protocols is not really on the Astros side, as you mentioned there. But
maybe the wrong team.
Hope that they take COVID a little bit more seriously than sign stealing, perhaps. Yeah. But spoken like I was going to say spoken like a true politician, but CJ spoken better than any politician in this country right now about how seriously we need to take COVID, and if especially for everyone's health, but also if we want to see this thing work. You can't have McDonald's if you want a beach body. That's just how it works. Speaking of which, I am very hungry right now. We got to take a quick time out, and we'll be back with a whole lot more on what we can expect from this season and whether or not people do believe that the Astros are still at fault for the sign stealing, or have we moved on? We'll be back after this.
I'm Luke Voigt, and I had drinks with Binks.
Hey guys, back to Drinks with Binks. I'm JSB. We've got CJ Nitkowski, former MLB pitcher, current MLB analyst. So much to talk with you about. Got to get to the bottom of this. We have 60 games down from 162, which means a completely different way of how to manage a season, of how to just facilitate everything. Is there going to be an asterisk beside whoever wins this World Series?
I don't think there will be, but certainly the discussion will be there. Recent history, we get 15, 20 years from now, we're still going to remember what happened in 2020 because of the shortened season. But as you start to get further away, that explanation probably does need to happen, right? The idea of shortened seasons, we've had strike shortened seasons in the past, 1981, 1995, not this short. but we don't really talk about it as much, right? And even though I think people that know the game well remember that was the case, or things were a little bit different. But this is really extreme, right? This is 60 games. This is 37% of the season. That is significantly shorter than those other couple of years that I mentioned. So I don't think you necessarily will see an asterisk in the record book, and every time that it's listed, I think that people that were around for this and that know the game will remember that. But the thing is, you still have to go through the same gauntlet when it comes to the postseason, right? It's still 10 teams. It's still trying to get in as a wild card. Now, there'll be some teams, I think there's a good chance that a team or two could get into the postseason that may not have over a 162-game season. Like, our sport, I think, is different than every other sport in the sense that we say things like, well, this roster and this team is built for the regular season, but they're not built for the postseason. We're also different in that it's very difficult to be a Cinderella story in our game, because over 6 months and 162 games, I mean, that's an absurd amount of games that we play every year. It's pretty hard to get lucky over that time. Right, we've seen there have been teams that have been on runs for 4 or 5 months and then don't make the postseason. Our game just does a good job, I guess to call it a good job, but it's just the way it works, of weeding those kind of stories out. Now, you could barely get in the postseason and go on a nice run, say the way that the Nationals did last year. I mean, they almost lost that wild card game. One bad bounce in the outfield, they won that wild card game, and then they go on to win the entire thing. So once we get into the postseason, yes, there's an opportunity for some Cinderella stories, but usually our game kind of weeds those teams out. Not this year. So this year it could be different, and we'll be having that conversation about teams that got in and won. Yeah.
Usually it's like you've been working at running a marathon, and now you have to use that same strategy to win a 100-meter dash, right? Yeah. So then you have to imagine that even just the nature of managing, of like how to just do all these things, that maybe you wouldn't have the Nationals, like the Dodgers went 30-30 2 years ago. Would they have even made the playoffs? They're in the World Series, right? Mm-hmm. So could you imagine, and just, we don't have a whole lot of time, but can you imagine maybe like a random team that makes it through? Maybe these guys, the Pittsburgh Blue Jays, that end up making it there just because of the season and how it is.
Yeah, I mean, it'd be nice for, I guess, Pittsburgh to finally get a postseason team in baseball for the first time in a while, so they could rally behind the Blue Jays. The Pirates got to be careful. They may lose a couple of fans because the Blue Jays are a young and exciting team. They're absolutely one of those teams that is in that position. I would put the White Sox in that position as well. Probably not a team that would have got in over the course of a full season, but might be able to do it over the course of 60. You mentioned managing. I think it will be different. Much shorter leashes, right? For your borderline guys. Your stars are going to get to play. They're going to be able to work through slumps. For guys that are making a team, I'll use an example here. Looks like a guy by the name of Isaiah Kiner-Falefa will be our starting third baseman this year. A non-prospect kid who's worked his tail off to kind of get himself in the mix. If he's off to a slow start, they may go slide Todd Frazier back over there and bring somebody else to play first. So the leash that you once had when you made a team, it used to be maybe sometimes 4 or 5 weeks to get a slump figured out. That's probably going to be gone. So that'll be the big difference. But yeah, there's definitely a chance, which I think, again, is good for our game, that there could be some Cinderella stories and teams that otherwise would not have been in the postseason this year. Yeah. Of course, the inverse is true. A favorite team may end up falling short because they had an injury that they missed a really important piece for 3 weeks, and then they don't make it.
Right, and that injury could even be COVID that could take a guy out or a couple guys out. We have also that to deal with. Before we go to break, the Astros, we mentioned, of course, one of the biggest stories in sports, and now we've had all of this time off since that has happened, also with the Red Sox, too, to a lesser extent, in a way. Is that story gone? Like, is that sort of, we've dealt with it, we've moved on at this point?
So they've caught a couple breaks. The Astros definitely have. One, the idea that that's died down some. Two, of course, that there's not going to be any fans in the stands. They were hearing it in spring training pretty significantly. That was only going to get worse during the season. They also caught a break because guys like Justin Verlander were not going to be ready to start the season, and now they will be. Now, they are dealing with some bullpen injuries as well, so I guess it's kind of got somewhat full circle. But I think that overall, they're probably pretty happy. Listen, nobody's happy that this virus is here, but the way that the season has gone down has worked in their favor. So I don't know if we're going to see any of those maybe intentional hit by pitches that we thought we were going to see, at least a few of them. It's not as much fun to do that with no fans either, right? Like, you want to do that when you're, say, the Yankees and the Astros come into New York and you got your home crowd, and you'd love to see, it's not going to be Garrett Cole, but, perhaps James Paxton, Masahiro Tanaka, throws that one up and tight one to Carlos Correa. Like, Yankee fans would eat that up. They would absolutely love it, and the stadium would be really fun to listen to in that moment. That's not going to happen. So I don't know if you can hold it over to 2021. I mean, that's a pretty impressive grudge to hold, but I think it's going to be significantly less than what we thought it was going to be prior to all this.
Yeah, we had Luke Voigt on the show a couple months ago, and he said he would definitely not forget what had gone on. So maybe the guys in charge of all of the fan noises will just have to have some of the really angry fans ready to go. Maybe they could have the cheers against the Astros ready. I mean, that would be, if we're being authentic,
It'd be nice. It'd be nice to be able to get it done. I don't know that's the other thing. I don't know what protocols are for MLB. Like, can you boo? Can you pipe in booing for a certain?
You're
Your
have
fans
to be able to wipe it booing.
Yeah,
no
you
one's
have
just going like yay the whole time. We got to get
especially
let's get some
when a rival's getting up. Of course, like Alex Bregman comes to hit here in Texas. They hammer him every single time. They got to, make it feel like it usually is for him.
Yeah. Get some chirps. Let's get everyone to record like their worst ever thing that they could say to someone, and we'll filter that in. We want to be realistic, right? Got to be true to the game. Okay, we got to take a timeout. We'll be back with more CJ Nitkowski on Drinks with Binks. Welcome on back to Drinks with Binks with CJ Nitkowski. We don't have a whole lot of time left. Got a couple cues I need. I need your very hard-hitting answers on. And one of them, a little bit more on the serious note, but our former coworker from FS1, now current Giants manager, Gabe Kapler, kneeling during the anthem the other day in support of criminal justice reform. How do you think, what do you think of it? How do you think it's received?
Well, for us knowing Gabe, not surprising that he had a really thoughtful statement right after the fact. And I really enjoyed the year that I spent with him. We were also teammates, back in, I guess it was 99, 2000, before he got traded actually to the Texas Rangers. But so I've always really enjoyed my time with him. I'm glad he is leading another team and getting a chance after Philadelphia, and a good time for him. I thought that his statement was really well thought out. I think we'll continue to see some of this around the game, no doubt, in all of our sports. I think the only thing I had wondered about was actually talking, how we cover this thing on television and what is the best way to do it. Because as much as I think everyone should be compassionate to the ideas, it's a great time to be a listener right now. That's kind of the position that I put myself in. Like, there's some voices that need to be heard right now. And so this is the time that we sit back and listen to those voices. But I also had wondered about, if we knew, let's just say in the Texas Rangers situation, that 3 or 4 guys had made that decision that they wanted to kneel, I'd almost love to get a heads up on it with a statement that then can accompany it, right? So that if players on our team had something that they wanted to say, we'd love to help them get that message across, right? And I know that not everything is going to be well received, and some of the stuff can get a little bit ugly at times, and that's unfortunate. But the idea of following with a message, I think, is really important in these situations, because there are some people that will take things, I think, the wrong way. And that's been one of the issues that we've run into, is that there's been a little bit of confusion in the message. And so the idea that a player can say, here's what's on my mind, the way that we got to see with Gabe, but from the players' voices, here's why I decided to take a knee. Here's what I want fans to know about how I'm feeling right now. I think that one would be really, really important. I think that one would have the best chance to resonate. So we did not see any of it yesterday, or Tuesday night, the first game that we had. We'll see what happens during the season. Chris Woodward, very progressive guy, no doubt, is I think he comes out of that Gabe Kapler mold a little bit, that he's had conversations with his players. He wants to hear what they have to say. Yeah. He wants to be empathetic and be able to provide them a platform should they decide that they want to have it. The only thing I wondered about from our standpoint, as far as what we do, is there a better way for us to communicate what's on a player's mind and really give them that opportunity to maybe get a message across, especially to the fans, because I know that owners and front office people get super concerned about alienating anybody, because we want everybody to watch the game. So I think, to me, that's a second little component that would fit in really well with this.
Right, yeah, and it would help you for being able to broadcast that moment, especially when you're not necessarily prepared for it. Speaking of Twitter, you are a guy that regularly, people would say, wins Twitter, because you're very witty and you're very thought out. Like, what's your method to the madness? We don't have a whole lot of time left.
Well, it's turned into less is more for me lately, just because it's, again, it's gotten a little ugly lately. It's not a great time, and people can be really sensitive. And I understand that. I want to be empathetic to that, but I like to joke around. Like, even these times, right, that you'll have no problem finding your shortage of bad news, and, it's raining every day and life is terrible. Like, you can find plenty of that on social media. So I try to have some fun. I try to make some jokes if I can. I know they're going to fall flat. There are times where I think I say something that is hilarious and it gets those 2 likes and that's it. And you're like, gosh darn it, man, I really like that. That's not funny. That's funny to me. And so that kind of stuff. But I always want to be lighthearted. I never want anybody to take me too seriously and understand my sarcasm. But I found myself tweeting actually just a little bit less, because I feel like people are, just looking for something to argue about. And so the things have changed a little bit over these last couple of years. But I think that you got to keep it lighthearted. Self-deprecating, I think, goes well, with fans, and have some fun, poke some fun at yourself. Don't think you're smarter than anybody else. Again, be willing to listen a little bit. Like, even when I do do analyst work, and sometimes I try to present things almost like questions, or I try to present things as here's a couple of different options and different ways to look at it. And just because I think this doesn't mean that if somebody else thinks a different way, that I think that person is a terrible human being and doesn't deserve to have a voice. But we do get some of that in social media. So I think
but that's what it is. If you disagree with me on Twitter, then you should go jump off a bridge.
But I love opposing views. Like, that's the thing. Like, I think for people that really care and enjoy it, and want to get smarter or see a different view, like, let me hear it. Don't shut it out. Let me hear what you have to say. Even on the baseball side, it's a much lighter topic, right? If we're talking about something about why I think Elvis Andrus should bat second and you're saying he should bat ninth, that's fine. Just go ahead and present it to me, and I'll tell you why you're wrong after.
Response and a discussion. That is what a wild, novel idea in 2020. Completely understand you on that. My drafts are very full with the number of tweets that I would have just put out there and then really regretted later. So I'm glad that that's not a thing.
Can I add one real quick thing to that real quick? It's something that I think I would recommend that any potential athlete or current athlete, I use tweet delete. And just because things change all the time. So no tweet on my account lives longer than 3 months. So if you want to screenshot stuff and try to burn me later, knock yourself out. I don't think I tweet anything to do that. But I just had come to a conclusion after the way that I see things have gone here. And you can set up any time period. You can make it 1 year. You can make it 1 day. But I just have it automatically that even some of the ones that have done well, and like my wife was, had a funny tweet and she was like, well, I said, it's going to be gone in September. And she's like, don't you want to save it? I'm like, nope. And I just think it's probably a smart thing for a lot of people to do. Just the idea of digging back in old stuff and trying to make it worse than it actually is. But I think any professional athlete, anybody in the public eye should use it. It's free. I signed up for it. And you'll never see a tweet on my timeline that's older than 3 months.
Man, had never heard of that before, but I think it would benefit all of us to probably sign up for something like that. No. I've worked for companies that really like to dig through those receipts, and they always exist somewhere. CJ, we got to go to break. We'll be back to say goodbye and a whole lot more. See you after this. Well, guys, we've had an awesome time drinking and binking with CJ Nitkowski with a little bit of coffee, and the Go Toronto Pittsburgh Blue Jays have no expectations, meaning they're going to win the World Series this year. CJ, where can we find you next?
So obviously the Ranger games, that'll be on Fox Sports Southwest. Of course, those are also on MLB.TV. I'll be doing, I think, 47 of the 60 this year. And then MLB Network Radio, I do a show a couple of days a week. I'm usually in on Tuesdays and Thursdays with Steve Phillips. That's on 7 to 10 Eastern Time, Sirius 209 XM 89. And then on Saturdays on that same station, do a show called Loud Outs with Ryan Spielborg. So radio 3 days a week, and a lot of baseball games. As you know, this industry and working in this business, it's all about the hustle. So a couple of jobs right now. 2 might be the lowest I think I've ever had at one.
Yeah, you are always hustling. As when I booked you on this interview, you were like, sorry, I'm short. I'm calling a game right now. I was like, okay, I really apologize for that. Always appreciate your insight. Your personality is unmatched, and you have always been a great friend through all of the different places that you and I have ended up in very random places right now compared to LA. Thank you so much, everyone. Make sure you check out CJ Nitkowski as well as Fubo Social on Instagram, YouTube, and Twitter, as well as you can listen to this in podcast format wherever you get your pods. Keep on drinking and binking, bitches. Sports is coming back. At least we think so, and maybe not by the time this airs.